Hi class, today we're going to have to talk about the death penalty, which is something which is in your next paper you're going to write about. Now, in order to talk about the death penalty, we want to look at least three separate meta-ethical principles. These are principles that you've already heard. So let's put them on the blackboard here. And the first one is natural law. And natural law, in a nutshell, means fulfill your natural function. The next ethical principle we're going to look at with regard to the death penalty is number 2, utilitarianism. And utilitarianism in a nutshell means do what's going to create the greatest net benefit, the most total happiness. It's often called consequentialism. So this is greatest net benefit. And I'll review these one more time before we look into them. And number 3, natural rights, which we've also seen. And natural rights, as you know, is based on the idea that all human beings have an unalienable set of natural rights. They come directly from nature. Some will say God or a deistic principle, but they are in essence 3. And that is, you have a right to life, which means nobody can kill you. You have a right to liberty, which means you can move about as you please. And you have a right to use your life and your liberty to accumulate private property. So those are the life, liberty, and estates. Life, liberty, and estates, which just means stuff you own. That's what estates means. And the fourth one, and this is the trickiest when it comes to death penalty, is deontology. Now, deontology, as we know, means never use a person as a means to an end. And the death penalty seems to be something that's quite the opposite of that. So how can we deal with these 4 basic meta-ethical principles? Again, meta-ethical principles means the principles that you're going to use to make a moral decision. So morality is what you do. Ethics is the intellectual tools you use to make those decisions about your behavior. So let's start. The death penalty, from the perspective of natural law, says that in order to put someone to death, you must demonstrate that the goal is not to put the person to death. The goal is to do something that is going to be fit in the natural order. So, for example, if you have a gangrenous foot, there's gangrene in your foot. If you don't cut the foot off, you'll die. So the goal is not to cut your foot off. The goal is to save the patient. So from the perspective of natural law, if you have a murderer in your society, that murderer has to be put to death, not because you want to kill him, but because you need to make sure your society is safe, and that fits with nature, the laws of nature itself. That's natural law. Aristotle would have suggested that. Same with St. Thomas Aquinas. It's justifiable to kill someone if, in fact, that is the only way that you can bring about a natural order. It's very important to recognize, though, that from the perspective of natural law, the goal is never to do a bad thing. So I can't kill that person for revenge. What I can only do is to kill that person to protect me or to protect my state. So the natural law philosopher does indeed have the possibility of supporting the death penalty. It's the natural thing to do. This is how we protect ourselves. The utilitarian, as I said before, is called proportionality. That means figure out what's going to be the best thing in proportion. But it's also called consequentialism. So the utilitarian would say, yes, the consequences of a death penalty might be good. So in other words, we could use the death penalty as a deterrent. So even if you kill an innocent person once in a while, that's fine, as long as the benefit of that death, of that putting that person to death, outweighs the harms. So the utilitarian is not terribly concerned about whether or not you kill an innocent person or a guilty person. The utilitarian is more concerned about what's going to be the greatest net benefit. So the utilitarian will say we use the death penalty as a deterrent. If everyone's afraid that they'll be put to death for murder, then we'll kill this guy to make sure they stay afraid. Natural law, we can put someone to death simply because of the fact that it's the only way to protect your society. Natural rights The third one, and we're going to see this in another lecture coming up, how natural rights allows you to justify abortion, but that's later. But natural rights says, wait a second, I don't have to put someone to death unless they're in the act of trying to kill me, so I can protect myself. My life I can protect through self-defense. But once someone's murdered another person, there's no reason for me to kill that person. And I only want to take away their life. It's the only option. So I would take away their liberty to make sure they can't kill other people, but I am under no circumstances required to kill that person. So the natural rights philosopher says that person, despite the fact that they're a murderer, still has the right to life, so long as their right to life doesn't incur harm on the lives of others. So we can put that person in jail. We might say they can't accumulate estates, but that actually isn't the way it goes. In jail, if you're in jail, even for murder, you can still keep your money in the bank. So, life, liberty, and estates are the essential goods, and if I can protect that person's life, even if they're a murderer, I should. The last one is deontology, and this is my favorite. It's called strict retributive justice. Strict retribution. Now, it's not my favorite because it's good. It's my favorite because it's well, you'll see. Strict retribution. Also known as the law of Talon, or lex talionis. And you know this already. The law of Talon says an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And don't you worry about that nonsense that if we all apply an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, we'll all be blind and toothless. That's not true. That's just a silly thing to say, despite what Mahatma Gandhi may have said. Deontology says this: if in fact you have a duty to treat people according to the reasonable principles they use, so in other words, I'm going to respect a reasonable murderer. That reasonable murderer thought it was the right thing to do to kill somebody. Therefore, not because I want revenge, but simply to give to that person precisely what they gave to another, through strict retribution, I will put that person to death. If they rob somebody, they will be robbed. If they rape somebody, they will be raped. So strict retributive justice says you will give to a person whatever that person has decided to do to another out of respect for them. That almost makes no sense. And so the idea is that if I reasonably conclude, well, if you're a parent, you do this all the time. If you think it's okay to hit your brother, then you must think it's okay for me to hit you. Do you think it's okay for me to hit you? No? Then don't hit your brother. And so it's quite like the golden rule. You do unto others as you would have others do unto you. But if you think killing someone is what you should do unto others, well, then the state has an obligation to kill you. And it's never because I'm going to use you for a benefit. So it's absolutely not about revenge. In fact, it should be done in darkness. Nobody should even know who the murderers are that get murdered. They should be killed simply because that is the choice that they have made with regard to how they treat another person. So retributive justice, called deontology, says you treat people the way they would treat others. Natural right says you don't have to take somebody's life if you can protect the community by simply taking away their liberty. The utilitarian says, well, if killing somebody once in a while creates fewer deaths, then we should. If killing somebody once in a while does not create fewer deaths, then we shouldn't. The utilitarian's funny like that. So, for example, let's just see. If I think on Super Bowl Sunday it would be a good idea every once in a while to, every Super Bowl Sunday we take a 2-year-old baby and we hang it up and chop it to death on television. And if it was determined that by doing that horrible thing that there'd be less murders in America, the utilitarian would sort of be stuck and say, well, that's a good idea. Let's just kill an innocent baby once a year on national television and it'll save 100,000 lives. Well, if that's true, then that baby will be chopped to death on national television. Yikes. That would never work out for natural rights. That would never work out for deontology. And it would never work out for natural law. Only the utilitarian can say what's ever going to create the greatest net benefit is what we ought to do. So from the perspective of the death penalty, natural law, it's that idea again of you don't do it in order to bring it. You don't treat a person as a means, just like in here. You do it because it's the only possible way to bring about a good. It's that whole notion that you can't do something with the intent of doing evil. You only do it with the intent of doing good, and there's absolutely no other way to avoid it. The example, again, is the gangrenous foot or the frostbit finger. I don't cut your finger off to give you pain. I cut your finger off to save your life. I don't give you a vaccination to give you pain. I give you a vaccination to save your life. So natural law says We can put somebody to death if it's for the best interest of the community and there's no other way to protect the community. The goal is to protect the community. They are unnatural, like a monster in the community. Utilitarian, greatest net benefit. Natural rights, protect everyone's rights to the degree that you can, even the murderer. And deontology, you should treat someone the way they reasonably chose to treat somebody else. And there you have it. So think about that murderer that he killed himself, so we won't have to worry about that. But think about that murder. Should he have gotten the death penalty or not? Thank you very much.